Hello and welcome to The World Today on Channels Television. I'm Cynthia Are. Here are our top stories. Now, following the ceasefire deal which was signed between the Ukraine government and pro-Russian rebels, the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has announced the release of 1,200 prisoners. The release was part of the deal which included an exchange of prisoners. He was speaking during a visit to the strategic southeastern port city of Mariupol, which has come under shelling from pro-Russian rebels in recent days. However, despite some sporadic shooting, the ceasefire appears to be holding.
Despite the deal which was reached between Ukraine and pro-Russia rebels, the situation is still strained between both parties. The city of Dnipropetrovsk in eastern Ukraine has become the only transfer point linking Donetsk and the rest of the world. However, strict security checks are still enforced along roads to Donetsk, as people who want to gain entry must first receive both vehicle and identification checks by the heavily armed soldiers. Some local residents have returned to the city. There are a few cars on streets at night. At the Minsk meeting, also attended by representatives from Russia and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Ukraine's government and insurgent leaders signed a ceasefire protocol which took effect later in the day. Meanwhile, Amnesty International says it now has proof to support the fact that Russia played a significant role in aiding the rebels. In fact, the evidence seems to be so glaring that Russia might be sued for war crimes.
What we have is new satellite images which we've acquired, and it's quite clear that there's direct and active influence of Russia. Russia can't deny being a party to the conflict anymore. Very systematic, well-organized mobile artillery and armored units in place. There's no way the separatist forces could have organized that themselves. On top of that, we also have eyewitness accounts of movement of Russian tanks across the border. So I think really that it's not deniable anymore. As far as we are concerned, it's an international conflict.
Touring a U.S. military base here, Hagel discussed plans to build a training center and other ways to shore up Georgia's forces. On a good note, he had some good news. The former Soviet Republic has now enhanced status within NATO.
Enhanced partnership status relationship that Georgia has just received in NATO is going to expand significantly defense capabilities, training, equipping, partnership possibilities for Georgia with all of the NATO partners.
The move brings Georgia closer to full membership, something fiercely opposed by Moscow. Georgian officials have compared the Ukraine crisis to what happened in 2008 when Russia fought a 5-day war with Georgia over a rebel province. Hagel will now head to Turkey to focus on building a coalition against Islamic State militants. The Minsk deal has brought forth a glimmer of hope to end the bloodshed in eastern Ukraine. Armed clashes in the region, which started in March, have claimed at least 2,600 lives.
Now, joining us on the program is the Voice of America's Daniel Scherf, who is in Mariupol. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us again on The World Today. Please tell us about the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko's visit to Mariupol today.
Yes, the Ukrainian president came down to the port city. He gave a speech to an audience mainly made up of supporters, but also workers apparently affiliated with a metal plant. And he talked to the press, and his main message was that if the pro-Russia rebels, who are only about 10 kilometers outside of the city of Mariupol, try to move in on the city, they will face a crushing defeat, that the forces of the Ukrainian government are building up. He said that they had more weapons and tanks and so forth, and that they would be able to defend the city, and that the people of Mariupol would also not accept the pro-Russia rebels moving in on the city. That's his main message that he had for the rebels. He also said that the ceasefire is going to hold on the Ukrainian side. We do have some occasional fighting that has been breaking out, and each side has accused the other, of course, of having violated the ceasefire.
Now, Daniel, is there still violence going on in eastern Ukraine despite the ceasefire? Because we're getting reports that that's the case.
Yeah, there have been occasional shootings, incidents of shells flying, from one side or the other. The Ukrainian military says that they only fire back in defense. The rebel side, backed by Russia, says more or less the same thing. But it's pretty clear that there have been some violations of the ceasefire. We spoke today at a border checkpoint just on the edge of Mariupol. And the Ukrainian soldiers there were saying that almost every day there's at least some shooting that does take place. But overall, the ceasefire does appear to be holding in that neither side appears to be trying to take any more ground at this point. So although the ceasefire involves, ironically, some firing on occasion, it's not quite as serious as we saw earlier on in recent weeks. And it seems like at least the front lines, the battle lines, are holding at the moment.
Now, just before I let you go, Daniel, earlier when I spoke to you, and you told us about the President Petro Poroshenko urging the people of Mariupol to support Ukraine. Could you give us more details on that aspect of his visit?
Yeah, he had a very, nationalistic Ukraine United message that he brought with him to Mariupol. But in the city here, there are mixed views on whether to support Ukraine as a united nation or to support the rebel separatists who want to have more autonomy and don't really trust the government in Kiev. So there are definitely different viewpoints here. And Mariupol is a part of the Donetsk region, so there is certainly a large sentiment in this part of Ukraine that leans more towards Russia. So certainly, if the rebels do move into the city, if the ceasefire is completely broken, it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is and whether or not it is like President Petro Poroshenko portrayed it as being one where the people of Mariupol would fight and defend for the city to be part of Ukraine.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining us on the World Today. I've been speaking with the Voice of America's Daniel Shev, who is reporting from Mariupol. Thank you very much. Now, in other news, the Iraqi government is not just sitting back and waiting for foreign intervention. They are doing their part to fight the invasion of the Islamic State militants. According to the Iraqi government forces, they have succeeded in clearing the militants from a wide area around the strategic Haditha Dam, helped by U.S. airstrikes. The jihadists have repeatedly tried to capture the dam on the river Euphrates in the western province of Anbar. The U.S. airstrikes were the first to have taken place outside the northern Iraq. Meanwhile, Iraq's parliament is scheduled to convene later today to vote on Prime Minister's designate proposed government. The makeup of the cabinet has not been revealed, but Mr. Abadi is expected to include representatives of all religious and ethnic factions. Now, 6 months since the Malaysia flight MH370 went missing, there is still no word on where it might be or if there are any survivors. There have been emotional scenes at a temple in Beijing where relatives of passengers on board the flight gathered to mark 6 months since the plane disappeared. About 30 relatives listened to a man read a poem, some cried and even sat on the floor. Tempers flared when police tried to move people on, and they were sparking and shouting based on analysis on satellite.